My name is Chris Simon, and this is my Module 1 presentation for EDL 853, Inclusive School Culture. So I'm going to dive right in because 15 minutes is going to go really fast for me. So a little bit about myself. I am married. I have 2 children who are 7 and 5 years old, almost 8 and almost 6 for both of them. So they're here at the school with me in Tonganoxie, Kansas. One's in 2nd grade and one's in kindergarten. It's been really awesome to have them both here this year because I get to see them each day. I live in the same town that I teach, which has really helped me grow in this community. I enjoy swimming, watching sports, golfing, and just playing with my kids. Professionally, I'm currently in my 15th year of teaching. 11 of those years I've taught in 5th grade, but I've also taught 4th grade when I first started and 1 year in 6th grade. I've worked in Manhattan, Circle District, which is by Wichita, Lawrence, and now I work in Tonganoxie. So I'm going to dive right into my article summaries. First article, which was titled 7 Ways to Create an Inclusive Classroom Environment, which I tagged as culturally responsive, was about schools. It said that schools are not taking steps to diversify their classroom environments at the same rate that higher institutions are. So colleges are at a better rate of this than lower grades. Demographic changes and increases in diversity provide opportunities for schools to increase the reach for the academic setting to include more students. And to achieve the inclusive environments, it said that we need to hire support staff, make sure that the teachers are highly trained, and that the curriculum needs to combat cultural inequality. So all of those things need to be looked at in order to improve our inclusive schools. The demographics of school zoning populations and the tests that we use to rank students should be evaluated in all our districts. Finally, the school environment needs to be respectful and reflect the diversity of the student population, but also allow for respectful conversations to take place. So, in the next article, which was Inclusive Leadership in Education, I tagged as equitable. It actually defines equality versus equity, which I had heard this definition before, but somewhere along the way I got flipped. And so it was really good to refresh this because I'm pretty sure I've even said it incorrectly, where equality is giving every student the exact same resources and same things, where equity is giving students the appropriate resources and supports to address their specific needs. And here for a little while, I've been flipping that definition when I use that. So I'm glad that I refreshed myself on that definition because that would have been embarrassing if I would have continued that for the long term. Inclusive leadership should include relationships that are equitable and involve people of all genders, races, and classes. And inclusive leadership should have the visible commitment from the administrators, show humility, have an awareness of their biases, curiosity for others, a cultural intelligence, and an effective collaboration between all the teachers. In order to make schools more inclusive, For all, leaders need to establish policies and set the foundations for improvement to be made for future generations of their students. Next, we had the 10 reasons for inclusive schools, which I tagged as inclusive school culture. And this, like the title implies, was a list of 10 reasons to have inclusive schools. The main idea of most of them were it started with defining inclusion as the system by which all children get equal access to education from same-aged peers. Some of my favorite reasons were that it creates confidence for the students in their ability to interact with other people with different abilities. And this includes all students, not just the ones that are normally included into those. Teachers in inclusive schools are highly trained in how to differentiate instruction, which is a valuable skill for students at all ability levels. So basically, the learning strategies that help students that may have a disability or from different cultural backgrounds is usually best practice anyway. So learning those strategies and using them for all students is usually best practice and will help them even if they aren't in that group. Next article was what is inclusive education and how can you implement it? I tagged it as supportive. Starts by defining full inclusion, partial inclusion, and mainstreaming. The primary difference between these being that full inclusion has students in the general ed classroom at all times. Partial has them in the gen ed classroom for part of the day and splits that time with the support room. And mainstreaming is where they're located in a self-contained room, and then they'll find times throughout the schedule to enter them into the general ed or for specials times or special events. Inclusive classrooms build confidence in students and help them develop communication skills with people that they may not be the same as them. And in the classroom, teachers can use strategies such as adaptive learning or cooperative learning to allow students of different ability levels to operate in the same room, while also providing them with opportunities to help each other. The next article was, what are the roles of principals in successful inclusive schools? I tagged this one as inclusive school culture. The role of the administrator is to create an inclusive culture for the building that the building must follow. In order to do this correctly, a clear understanding must be had about what inclusive learning is by the administrator. The article offers advice on how to utilize staff and how to structure your building to provide the best support. For example, it advises that special education teachers be placed on grade level teams rather than just in specific teams when they have PLC meetings. Also, providing ample time to communicate and plan is very important. IEPs need to be enforced in order to make sure that students are progressing towards their goals. And IEP planning processes and schedules/transitions for future years, like from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, need to be handled by every member in the team on both sides of that transition. Finally, it urges the reader not to forget social inclusion as a major component in the impact of a student's well-being. The next article was called The Inclusive School, which I classified as equitable. This article challenges the traditional exclusionary practices of existing school models. It argues that several systems by design are created to limit a group. By opening the students to a more broad set of experiences, they are learning the value of diversity at a younger age. Inclusion should include all students beyond those just with disabilities. It means that the opportunities for all classes and clubs should be available to all with an interest in participating, regardless of their skill or ability. A lot of strategies used for students with special needs are also best practices for students. I mentioned this earlier, because everyone learns slightly differently, and therefore more practiced in adaptations makes a teacher better prepared to teach all students. Tracking or leveling students is a practice that needs to be challenged in order for students to grow to their potential rather than just their test score. So it says that tracking and leveling students is not best practice. The next article, Developing an Inclusive Classroom Culture, which I tagged as Inclusive School Culture, creates opportunities for students to show who they are. They'll help you teach them better by understanding their experiences. Create a culture of respect by taking the time to learn about equity together and have high expectations of the students. Students should be allowed to take some ownership in their classroom, which will increase their buy-in. You need to create an environment where all types of learners will be successful. Do this by giving students the ability to provide feedback, and then find ways to involve your students with the surrounding community while also tying the community back into the classroom. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Create a connection between the current class and the previous classes as an example. Building an inclusive school culture with equity of access to knowledge, which I tagged as supportive. This was the YouTube video, and in this video we learned that giving equity to access for our students requires having courageous conversations. Teachers should use their knowledge of students' past with historical trauma or poverty to help them create environments that do not put these children at a disadvantage. So just part of that courageous conversation is to really assess where your students are at and trying to find a place where you can meet them where they're at. Giving students access to courses in their native languages can also provide them with equitable opportunities to succeed. The next article was called The Value of Inclusive Education. I tagged it as supportive. In this article, it defines inclusive education similarly to the other articles, but really makes a great point about how school is providing students with their first interactions with the outside world, outside of their families. So giving them diverse interactions is really important. Specialized classrooms do not guarantee that students will succeed. Therefore, studies have shown that students are more successful when they work in the regular ed classroom with supportive assistance. Schools can achieve an inclusive environment through training their staff, empowering the parents and community to advocate for their children with diverse needs. The next article, which was creating inclusive schools for all students, I tagged it as equitable. It was about the efforts of schools to eliminate special classrooms and pullouts for their schools in order to force the classrooms to be inclusive. I thought this one was really interesting because it was what I would say is probably a more radical idea, where they were saying that there will be no exceptions, students will not be pulled out of the room, which I think is kind of a radical idea, but it often forces everybody to the table to come up with strategies that you would use for even high needs students, and things that you would use for high needs students are often best practices for students at all levels. So the rigid structure had no exceptions, and the article argues that leveling students should not work as well as providing in-class interventions for students with greater needs. The next article was tips on creating an inclusive school and why it matters. I tagged it as inclusive school culture. The article discussed the All Handicapped Children Act and how it ensures students have equal access to education. However, the law does not solve the issue of equity on its own. The responsibility of an inclusive environment falls on the teachers and specialists around the building. Teachers need to collaborate together as well as work with parents to create a culture that will include everyone. And the article then discusses how an inclusive environment benefits students by giving them social skills with people from different backgrounds, improved attendance, higher emotional stability. Schools make time for collaboration that involve all stakeholders are often more successful, and inclusion should be taken all the way down to the school mission statement. After reading the articles, I defined inclusive school culture as a culture that includes not only students with disabilities, but children of different cultural backgrounds and socioeconomic status and races, and provides them an equitable opportunity to learn. It should go beyond just academics to also include clubs and sports as well. I defined education as giving diverse students the opportunity to learn side by side, giving all students the opportunity to collaborate and work with students from different backgrounds, using accommodations and highly trained strategies to keep all students in the same room. And I defined leadership as it should be modeled in a way where people are treated equitably and include people of all genders, races, and classes, and it should have a visible commitment from the administrator, show humility, have an awareness of their biases, curiosity for others, and a cultural intelligence and an effective collaboration. The school's role in maintaining this culture, and what if it doesn't exist? The school leaders, the leader must first lead by example. They need to be well trained, and they need to make sure that their staff is well trained as well. They need to have a lot of staff opportunities to learn. They need to provide time for people to work together. This time needs to include special education teachers as well. If the culture doesn't already exist, then they need to align their staff with a new school vision that focuses on inclusion. And they need to get the necessary buy-in through a lot of courageous conversations. What supports can a school leader provide to promote advocacy? If an administrator wants to promote advocacy for their staff, they must first model it for them. They need to show that they're an advocate for their teachers and encourage them to advocate for their students. They need to recognize that some growth may be uncomfortable, but regardless, it's important of that uncomfortable. It's sometimes important to work through that uncomfortable conversations. And you need to provide opportunities for feedback to be given by both staff members and the students so that they can feel heard throughout the entire process. What plans and strategies can be implemented to ensure the equitable treatment of students and their staff in an inclusive culture. One aggressive approach is to not allow separate classrooms based on their abilities, without exceptions. So that extreme model that I talked about would do the trick. However, less aggressive might be to create additional sports teams and clubs that allow for more inclusive experiences, give time for teachers to work on best practices together, but include specialized teachers to be and support staff in those meetings as well. And how to change negative assumptions about inclusive culture. You can use quantitative. If you want to show that this works, you need to use quantitative data that supports diverse, inclusive classrooms compared to how they performed with levelized groups. Provide people with from all backgrounds easy access to feedback opportunities, so it isn't just one population being heard, and get the building on board with the why. Explain why this is happening, which means take the time to explain why the culture needs to change in order to be more inclusive, and you'll increase your buy-in. So my concluding thoughts, and I'm running up against my time. I have a better understanding of inclusive education because I've been able to read about and work with models that demonstrate the ideal scenario would be. My educational leadership skills have expanded more after completing this assignment. My presentation promotes the well-being of students and adults because it talks about strategies that can be used to create an equitable environment for all students and staff. I felt it was relevant because it gave me the key definitions for equity and inclusion. I'd be lying if I said that experience didn't lead me to be skeptical of some of the ideas as far as like full inclusion. However, even though some of the ideas may have seemed more radical, I definitely understood the point of bringing everybody to the same table and working through these challenges because it is extremely important. My school would probably be better about increasing on our inclusive rates. I think currently we struggle in some of those areas. We have a lot of specialized classrooms, so a lot of students are out of the room more than maybe they should be. I think some of that has resulted from staffing issues, but it is definitely something we need to continue to work on. And so I talked about that again in my reflection, how there have been some staffing concerns, and maybe that's led to some of the increased movement of a lot of students. But I do think that it'll make me a better teacher. It's going to challenge my current ideas about inclusion. And as a future leader, I'm going to promote that future success of my students by giving them opportunities to provide a lot of feedback so I can try to hear them and try to meet them where they're at. I want to provide everyone equal opportunities, all of my students. I want to hire staff that's reflective of my diverse population. And I think that with change, there will always be difficulties, but when things are done with conviction and for the right reasons, they're going to work out. So here is one citation for my work. Here's my other. Thank you very much for living. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. Thanks.